Good afternoon. It's 4:02. We are ready to begin. We'll call the meeting to order, and we'll start by saying that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. I will look to committee to see if there are any conflicts to report. I am seeing none. So we'll move to the consent items. Any items to be pulled? And if not, anybody want to move the entirety? Okay, Councillor Sali is moving the entire list of consent items. Do I have a seconder? I see Councillor Pelosa got up just a fraction ahead of Councillor Lewis. So any comments on the consent items? Councillor Pelosa.
Sorry, we're just settling in. Thank you, Madam Chair, and just a sincere thank you to staff in regards to item 2.1 for our finding 20 extra pickup locations that we could do within the budget that's already been set. My residents, for the most part, are very happy with just any improved service they can get, especially within the budgetary constraints we already have. So thank you for working with me on that.
All right, any other comments or questions? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to say for the record, Councillor Pelosa has been a fraction of a step ahead of me all day.
All right, with that, we will call the vote. We're having some technical challenges, so if people will just bear with us. So if the mayor and if Councillor Lewis would like to indicate their vote publicly into the microphone.
Manually, yay.
In support, yes.
Okay, we're having technical difficulties. So for this vote, if Councillor Pelosa and Councillor Sali could also indicate manually.
Yay.
Yay.
And I will also vote yay.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Wonderful. We'll move to items for direction. Item 4.1 is a submission from Councillor Kayabaga. Welcome, Councillor, to the Community and Protective Services Committee. Would you like to introduce your submission?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. It's my understanding that actually staff are bringing forward a report, but I had already submitted this letter when they indicated that they're going to bring a report back on vacancy in the downtown. But my motion was specifically on some of the heritage buildings that we have in the core that have heritage easement agreements on them. And the reason being was that I received a lot of communications from the community concerned about some of the heritage buildings that are boarded up right now and that have been sitting for a long time and there hasn't been anything done with them. Specifically on the old library one, I received a lot of communications and petitions from the community. And I just wanted to know, I did some research on it and found that there was an easement agreement that the purchaser had signed with the City of London, and there wasn't any policy in place to do a follow-up on our part to see whether or not the owner of the building is following some of the agreements that he signed with the city. So that's what this motion was about, to kind of follow up and also to respond to the community's questions and concerns that they had around the old library.
I wonder if, Mr. Katolik, you have something to say?
Sure. We're coming back with a report in Q1 of 2020 with respect to amendments to the property standards bylaw. The Heritage Act isn't part of my purview, but I definitely would work with the Heritage Planner to look at the heritage easements with respect to heritage buildings that have these easements, to look at what enhanced enforcement actions can be taken.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from committee? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Actually, if I might, perhaps to Councillor Kayabaga, please, just to clarify, it looks like you're not excluding any buildings that are vacant. You've made specific reference to Heritage Conservation District location. But it seems to me that you're talking about any properties that might be vacant. Is that your intent? I just want to be clear, please.
Councillor?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Chair. It's a conversation that I think we've had with Mr. Katolik, and there are a number of vacancies in the core, and we are it's part of the core action plan as well to look at what to do around those vacancies. This specific motion actually speaks on the Heritage Act, and specifically for those who have heritage easement agreements on them. And if I could get staff to confirm, there's about 5 of them in the City of London. That was my understanding, but because staff is already doing an overall look on all the vacancy and all the heritage properties as well, I think they're gonna put it all together and bring back a report that reflects all of the concerns that we may have or may not have thought of. But I just wanted to ask a question through you, Chair, to staff. There's already a policy in place to address these issues. Maybe there wasn't a policy on, I just want to understand where the missing link was in terms of going back and following back on some of these agreements to make sure that they're up to standard and they're following the agreements that were signed between an owner and the City of London.
Through the chair, that would be a question better answered by the Heritage Planner, but I could say in terms of vacant buildings across the city, there's about 140 of them, and then we report on the worst ones on an annual basis and recommend demolition. And I could tell you that the ones that we recommended for demolition, there is one left that the city needs to take action on, because what we find from our experience over the years is that once we issue the report that the city is going to be demolishing buildings, those buildings either get sold or the property owner takes action to fix the building up. So we would be looking at the entire list of registry of vacant buildings and looking at the city as a whole, but also focusing together with the Heritage Planner on the heritage easements.
And my apologies, Mr. Mayor. You had the floor. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, and I appreciate the intent of the councillor in presenting this letter and Mr. Katolik's comments. I was actually thinking through your chair to Mr. Katolik the other way, not so much those buildings that you indicate may well be designated for demolition. and therefore action gets taken in some fashion, but actually quite the opposite, where there's the concern that some have about demolition by neglect. That is to say, if for any reason heating or air conditioning type units that are necessary to maintain certainly the internal component of a structure, that somehow if those structures are impacted by the removal of that kind of equipment, that to me is as neglectful and frankly is as concerning, I think, as be it a heritage or otherwise property. So I was pleased that the councillor's note or recommendation said that, and it says that civic administration report back to CAPS on potential options that may be available to make sure vacant properties, and I'll add what the councillor said, including properties designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. And so therefore that means all vacant buildings, that there be some clear responsibility on the part of owners of buildings to maintain their buildings in some order, so that you don't have to compel destruction or demolition. So it strikes me that that I like the approach of this, as long as there are mechanisms and powers within our municipal bylaws that allow you to confirm that that heating and air conditioning type units that are necessary are not removed, or which then ultimately becomes demolition by neglect. So I'm going a different way than you are, Mr. Katolik, in the sense of those that might have a different intention than you might. And so perhaps again through you, Chair, to Mr. Katolik, just to confirm, would we have the power, ability, bylaw strength to be able to review buildings that become potentially derelict as a result of removal of equipment? Do you have the authority to confirm, check, do what you need to do to assess these properties, be they heritage or not?
Through the chair, yes, we would have that authority under the vacant buildings bylaw. The bylaw was passed in 2009, and so it's 10 years old. It's probably due for a solid review. Right now, in terms of heating vacant buildings, the property standard bylaw speaks to heritage buildings, because you don't want that thaw happening in the wintertime with no heating. But certainly we could look at the vacant building bylaw and have regard for that within that bylaw.
So, Chair, through you, the question I would have, in the 10 years since that bylaw was introduced, how many buildings have you determined have either had heating or air conditioning removed? And is that a result of that none have been, based on your checking? I'm trying to get a sense of how we follow up on these. Is it by complaint? Is it by roster, knowing that these are vacant? So I'm trying to get a sense of our success rate of reviewing of those kinds of structures.
Through the chair, I don't have specific numbers on the heating and cooling, because a lot of the vacant buildings, they remove all services to the building, so the buildings just stand there as an empty shell. And the vacant buildings bylaw is done on a responsive basis, so we don't proactively look for vacant buildings. I can tell you the last year we addressed 198 complaints on vacant buildings. This year we're at 239, and we still have a couple months to go. So it is a bylaw that in 2014 we had 106. So it's on an increase in terms of the number of complaints on vacant buildings.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I heard Mr. Katolik say that that some individuals remove the heating and air conditioning of these buildings, but isn't that the point? Isn't the point, Chair, that we're trying to prevent that type of practice so that we can maintain the integrity of the structures themselves? Again, be they architecturally or heritage related buildings or not. To me, the issue is if people intentionally remove heating and air conditioning, and I don't even want to presuppose intent, but with the notion that what ultimately happens is that that will cause internal decay of a property, which ultimately becomes demolition by neglect. That's what I'm particularly concerned about, and what I think that the councillor's letter is intended to try to address, be it heritage or otherwise, because I think vacant buildings, where heating and air conditioning units have been removed, is absolutely a dereliction of responsibility. And that's what I'd be looking for us to do, is to ensure that we do our part to prevent that from happening. Thank you.
If I could, will your report, Mr. Katolik, coming in Q1 of 2020, will it include information about the things that the mayor's talking about?
Yes, through the chair, it will. We'll have a look at the vacant building bylaw through the lens of demolition by neglect. The other thing I wanted to mention is the reality in the field is a lot of these buildings are broken into. Squatters get in there, they start removing all the copper piping, all the copper wires. So the property owner simply says, it's probably easier to board up the building, cut off the electricity, cut off the gas, yet the building sits there in a vacant state, which does nothing positive for the neighborhood.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll ask folks' indulgence if I'm rehashing a couple of things here, but I appreciate what Mr. Katolik just said, because property standards complaints are often appealed to the Committee of Adjustment. So I've got a little bit of experience with this, and I'm concerned that well, I appreciate the intent. It's my understanding, and having done a ride along with the fire department, we did a couple of vacant property inspections along the way. So my understanding is we already have a registry of vacant buildings in the city, that we're doing this on a complaint-based basis, because frankly, as these numbers keep growing, you only have so many staff to send out on any given day to look at these things. And to your point about wiring and things being ripped out, I've certainly seen photos of that actually happening. It's my understanding that we only require the services to be maintained on heritage designated buildings to prevent the decay. Is that correct? We don't require that service be maintained on all buildings that are currently vacant?
No, that's correct.
And that's a requirement under the Ontario Heritage Act, correct?
That's actually a requirement under our property standards bylaw to recognize heritage properties, both designated as a district and individually.
So to follow up on that, and I'll point to the Cedars as an example, something that I think most folks remember, fairly recent history in the city. We do have situations where these buildings are actually broken into, and we have people who are, whether they're trying to use the electricity services illegally, or whether they're lighting a fire pit inside a building for warmth or whatever. That's one of the reasons that boarding up of windows has been deemed to be an acceptable practice, is because it secures the building from, as best as possible, knowing that nothing's 100%, it secures the building from illegal entry. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I will just wrap up very quickly then, Chair, saying I appreciate the intent, and believe me, I drive past that library building and on Queens and wonder when we're ever going to see anything happen here. I'm just not sure what other tools we would be putting in staff's hands to deal with this. I'm certainly open to hearing that, but I'm just not sure that it's a problem, and the letter certainly identifies the problem. I'm just not sure what the actions are beyond the tools that we've already given you.
Through the chair, I'll speak about two of the tools which I think we should give serious consideration to. We already have a vacant building registry, which is informal, about 140 properties on that list, but there's no cost to the property owner. So fire department goes out once a month, checks the building, no cost to the property owner. If that building was in Hamilton, the property owner would be paying a registry fee of around $1,000 a year, which would cover some of the costs for the proactive inspections. The other issue is escalated fines or administrative penalties. We just started the AMPS program last Friday for parking. We want to work out all the IT details and make sure the parking system is running smoothly. and then we're going to start to transfer the AMP system to other bylaws. I feel that the property standards bylaw and the vacant building bylaw might be one that the AMPS system might be one that would be useful to apply penalties to, because in our experience, property owners won't take action if there's no financial impact.
So, Mr. Katolik, with this letter and having heard from the counselor, I'm just trying to get to a motion. Should we, as a committee, and would you want us to refer the counselor's submission to you so you can consider this as part of your report that's coming back in the first quarter of 2020?
Yes, may I suggest, though, that just the wording be somewhat amended that we use a demolition by neglect lens when we're reviewing this vacant building bylaw and the property standards bylaw.
So add that wording to the letter, or so refer your letter and include that the staff use a demolition by neglect lens when considering.
That's correct.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to ask this question again. When I was writing this letter, I struggled with which committee it actually should go to, because there is heritage involved, and when heritage is involved, it should go to PEC. But we came to the conclusion that it should come to this committee because Mr. Katolik was already putting together a report on the vacancy. And when we talk about vacancy, it goes to CAPS. But I think that one of the things that we're leaving behind is the fact that I did mention heritage easement agreements, and if we talk about the old library, for example, just as an example, there is an easement agreement that was signed between the owner and the city, and there are requirements that the owner has to meet and satisfy in order to keep the building, but we didn't set policies, or when whoever the council at the time did not set any policies around what type of actions could be taken if the agreement is not respected. So I was looking to see if we could get something in place to, number one, in the agreements that they signed, it does permit the city to go in and look at assess the building to see it in which condition that the building is in at that moment. So I know this is a little weird because it's sort of like a PEC/CAPS committee issue. I don't think that just adding the wording is going to honestly respond to the request here. The request here is to be able to follow through on this agreement that was signed between the owner and the city, and to see whether or not they're meeting the requirements, and if we can have those policies in place that we can go back and do something after. So sorry, go ahead.
So if we refer your letter, it includes all the wording in your letter, but with that added note about the demolition by neglect. So that's what Mr. Katolik was suggesting, to refer your letter back to him, including a line about staff using a demolition by neglect lens when reviewing the vacant buildings bylaw. But Councillor Sully was trying to get in here as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm supportive of the request. I don't have a concern with it being a request to report back. I can appreciate the refer back portion, but I think the letter does address a lot of the concerns and what the tools are, the tools needed to try to find a solution to the concern. From a police board perspective, I find that sometimes some of our resources are deployed because we're having to check in on vacant lots and things like that. So I want to move it as is with the report back with the comments regarding the demolition. I don't think we need to refer it back, and I'll look for a seconder, and if there's not, then we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lewis.
I'll answer to either one. I just wonder, because I'm supportive of where the mover is going, I'm supportive of the intent behind this. So I just wonder if the mover would be comfortable with us referring this request for the report back, all the language included, including the easements and the demolition by neglect, to come back as part of the report that's already being conducted on our bylaw, the property standards bylaw.
So report.
So bring this back as part of the property standards report.
You okay with that? So report back, not using the word referral, but saying that civic administration be requested to report back as part of their report back in Q1 2020. So So I'm just going to make a comment. As far as some of the comments that have been made, this has been a great discussion. It's a long time coming, and in fact, I did not do any kind of submission because I have been in conversation for 5 years with Mr. Kulcholik about many of the vacant homes in Ward 5. And these are homes in residential neighborhoods. They've got neighbors all around them who care for their properties. They're raising families and all of that. And all of a sudden, somebody just leaves their house. They lock the door, they move somebody somewhere else, and they let this thing go to rot. And of course, there are people that move in, there are people that just camp out in the backyard or on the porches or actually enter the buildings themselves. And it was, I did know that our report is coming because I finally called Mr. Katolik after doing a lot of very proactive enforcement, having staff put these homes on the list that Mr. Katolik spoke about, and having the fire department do regular checks, pools drained, grass cut, roofs repaired, all of that sort of thing. And I finally called Mr. Katolik and said, there has to be more that we can do. So this will be a very welcome report because we will be doing more. The only place that seems to work is enforcement. So, you know, when we've gone to demolish a home, all of a sudden, people are interested in doing something. We've been asking them to do something for years and years and years, and it only comes to the very end where they say, oh, okay, I guess I'll do something about this. So I'm grateful to the councillor for bringing this letter. I'm grateful to staff that this report is coming forward. We have a mover, we have a seconder. Are there any other comments or questions? I'm not seeing any, so we can vote. And we have a meeting that's starting in 1 minute, and I'll talk to the clerk about what we're going to do about that. So let's vote. Okay, this system is not cooperating on a day when time is tight. So I will look for a manual vote. If you can each indicate one by one in the microphone.
Yay.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. I'll report out because it's pretty obvious. The vote is 5-1. Councillor Hillier is under the weather today, and that's why he is not with us. So we'll keep going. We're going to move on. We're on item 4.2, which is a request for support of the Canadian Urban Libraries Council. That is a letter, I believe, that we received. Any questions or comments, Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll ask the clerks. I don't think it had the opportunity to get circulated, but Councillor Pelosa has agreed to second, and I did have a motion that requests that this be noted, as well as some direction that the mayor be requested to communicate this concern to our federal counterparts.
Mr. Mayor.
Well, thanks.
Oh.
Thanks very much, Chair. You know, I have traditionally had a challenge when different levels of government try to compel other levels of government to do things not directly related to them. So here we have a situation where our London Public Library, whom we all know has strong outreach in this community, and look, we all know they do a great job, but we're now being asked to do the work of the Canadian Urban Libraries Council in terms of lobbying the federal government. And as I look at some of the things that they've asked us to do is to promote some content issues in Ottawa and to support federal initiatives at a broader Canadian reach. And if this was specific to the London Library, I'm all in. But when the asks are much broader, That is to say that we're asking the federal government, and when the London Public Library asks us to do the work of the Canadian Urban Libraries Council, I've got serious challenges with this. And I look at it from the standpoint of the credibility that we have from our federal counterparts. Look, I think the libraries through the Canadian Urban Libraries Council can do all of this as they choose, and I think that's great. That's their issue. But when they come back and they ask the local council to do the work of the Canadian Urban Library Council, I'm challenged. If this was specific in terms of its support for the London Library, I get it. But as soon as we start adding the Libraries Council to increase access to digital publications for public library customers in the city of Ottawa, well, that's great for Ottawa. And I certainly encourage the Council of Ottawa in Ottawa to promote that for their purpose. And I'm thinking they're doing that not because Ottawa is our nation's capital, but because that happens to be an issue in that particular constituency. So I don't mind fighting my own fights. I just have real issue about taking on on what is ultimately an advocacy group to the federal government, and that I'm severely challenged with, and I'd support anything relating to London and stop it there.
I'll just quickly read the motion that the London Public Library is asking with respect to, okay, so that the communication dated October 25th, okay. That the mayor be requested to call on the federal government to A, investigate the barriers faced by public libraries in acquiring digital publications and the problems these barriers pose for vulnerable demographic groups in Canada, and B, develop a solution that increases public library access to digital publications across Canada and assists public libraries in meeting the cost requirements to acquire digital publications. So that's the motion that's being requested, and I'll go to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think I can address a couple of the mayor's concerns very quickly here in the interest of time. Yes, there was a typo in the library submission that referred to Ottawa when it should have said London, and certainly I'll communicate that back to the library. There was an error in the letter that was sent to us, but very specifically, Your Worship, and through you, Madam Chair, this comes down to copyright issues, which are federal jurisdiction, and the increasing tax burden through the municipal tax levy that libraries are going to be coming to us with if this situation isn't challenged. So it actually is and should be viewed through that municipal lens for our public library. If the status quo is left to be maintained, then we will face increasing budget pressures for the municipality through the library board to be able to continue to offer digital publication services. So that's why this has come forward, and that's why with the support of Councillor Pelosa, we came up with this one that was purely about access and the acquisition of digital publications, and didn't include all of those other things that were in the communications to us.
Mr. Mayor.
Thanks. I appreciate the clarification from the councillor. I'll support that, and I've already expressed my caution about the efforts that London needs to do for London's sake, but on that basis, I'm prepared to support.
Great, so it's moved by Councillor Lewis and seconded by Councillor Pelosa, and we will vote manually, starting with Councillor Salee.
Yay.
Yes.
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 And I vote yes as well, so the motion passes 5-0. We will move to the next item on our agenda, which is item 4.3, the position statement regarding vaping in schools that was submitted by the Human Environments Analysis Laboratory and Youth Advisory Council. Okay, so the motion that the Youth Advisory Council is asking is that the following actions be taken with respect to the communication from D. Bowman, University of Western Ontario, related to a request for delegation status to speak to the Community Protective Services Committee with respect to vaping in schools. A, the above noted delegation request be approved for the December 3rd CAPS meeting. B, the above noted communication and position statement from the Human Environments Analysis Laboratory Youth Advisory Council be forwarded to Chris Mackey, Dr. Chris Mackey of Middlesex London Health Unit for consideration, and C, the above noted items be received. Councillor Sully?
Just moving it.
Any other comments, questions? Councillor Pelosi?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, just a question in regards to this correspondence and the topic at hand, recognizing that vaping schools, students, and the marketing has been a discussion within our public health sector as well. Would it be advised to offer Dr. Mackey an opportunity to either speak at the same time in case they had any concerns of what was being presented, or a written submission coming back in advance, having had the opportunity to review their submission to us?
So part B of the motion that has been crafted and moved by Councillor Sully is that that the communication and the position statement be forwarded to Dr. Mackey for consideration.
And offer delegation status to Dr. Mackey. at the
Absolutely, we can
council.
add that and offer delegation status to Dr. Mackey as well.
I'm happy to second that.
And the mayor is seconding that. And so if there are no other questions or comments, we can vote manually, starting with Councillor Sully.
Yay.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
I vote yes as well. That passes, motion passes 5-0. There is no deferred matters. Oh, there is a deferred matters list. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Lewis is moving the deferred matters list, and it is seconded by Councillor Pelosi. Go ahead, Councillor Salee.
Yay.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
I vote yes as well. The motion passes 5-0. Final motion is to go in camera for personal matters regarding an identifiable individuals, including municipal employees with respect to the 2020 Mayor's New Year's Honors List. Moved by Councillor Sully, seconded by the Mayor. We can do a hand vote on that. The motion passes. We are going in camera, but I think Ms. Daters-Beer wants to say something first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of all of us, members of Civic Administration, who are active participants in the CAPS meeting and attendees here on a monthly basis, we wanted to wish you and thank you for your work as the chair and to the members of the committee. And thank you for the support over the last year. We wish you the best as you move on to your new committees, and to Councillor Lewis, who takes on the lead for the CAPS committee and the new members. We look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I always thought that this was my second year on this committee, but it's the end of my third year on this committee. So I will miss you all. Not you, Mr. Kotzebue, you're hardly ever here. But
That was for everybody but Mr. Kostovich. I just want to be clear about that.
Thanks
Through
very
you,
much.
through you, Chair.
thanks. So we will adjourn this meeting in camera, or in the committee room, when we go back into public session.